Hi everybody, welcome back on Lit Up with Annie. This is the second session on literature part, and today we're going to complete the Anglo-Norman literature. Whatever is left from Anglo-Saxon, and we're going to begin with Anglo-Norman and complete that in this session today. All right, so in the last session, we talked about Beowulf and we also saw some names from the Anglo-Saxon literature. Moving on from there, in the beginning of the session, I told you yesterday that we had two styles of writing. One was the like that Germanic style, and second was that Christian style of writing. Today we're going to start talking about the Christian writers that were there in the Anglo-Saxon age. So Christian writers of the age, we had two schools. One was under the leadership of Saint Augustine. The other was under the leadership of Aidan. Now, the one school that that was under the leadership of Saint Augustine, they came from Rome. When they came from Rome, they spread in the southern regions of England, especially Essex, and also the center of England. But if we look at the literature that was produced by this school, we don't really have a lot. There is no lasting literature that was actually produced by the first school. The second one was under the leadership of Saintly Aidan. They came from Ireland. Now, the monks that were there in this school chiefly labored in Northumbria. I hope you remember the map. Northumbria, the upper northern region. So that is where the monks of this school were there. The influence that this school had on the entire nation is remarkable. In fact, whatever we know of Anglo-Saxon literature, we owe it to the second school, which came under the leadership of Aidan. We have great names that come from this second school of Christian writers. So we have Bede, we have Kedemon, we have Wolf, three great names that we actually know from Anglo-Saxon literature. So, सबसे पहले we start talking about Bede. Lived from 673 to 735. He's also known as the Venerable Bede. He's generally called that. And the father of English learning also, we call him. He wrote most exclusively in Latin. The language that he wrote in was Latin. The last work that he wrote was translation of the Gospel of John into Anglo-Saxon. It is lost. It was his translation of the Gospel of John. He translated it into Anglo-Saxon. Unfortunately, it is lost. And much to our disappointment, the books and the story of his heroic life is not really included in the history actually, because so much was lost. The work that was most important to us is Ecclesiastical History of English People. So many times I have already mentioned this work. So yes, this is the most important work. It is a very, very fascinating history to read. Even now, people go back to read this work, Ecclesiastical History of English People. So I won't really talk much about Bede now, because as I said, not much is included except this work, Ecclesiastical History of English People. We move on to talk about Kedemon. Kedemon was there in the 7th century, and he is also called the Anglo-Saxon Milton. Why? Because of what he wrote. He talks about the fall of man, the paradise lost, which is similar to what Milton wrote in the future. So he's known as the Anglo-Saxon Milton. And the crazy part is that he couldn't read, he couldn't write anything. I think I mentioned it yesterday also. So Kedemon could not read, could not write. So the story is really interesting of Kedemon's life. There was this monastery. It was the monastery of Abbess Hilda. Okay. What happened is Kedemon was a herdsman, as I said yesterday also. And even when people would sit around, feast and sing, Kedemon would never sing. He was so ashamed of singing, and he would just ignore. Whenever his turn would come to sing, he would just get up and go away somewhere. Similarly, this thing happened once. There was a feast going on and everybody was sitting. When his turn came to sing, he just got up and he said, I have to go and tend to my horses and stuff. So he went and he slept there. In his dream, he was asked to sing. Kedemon, in the dream it came to him, Kedemon, sing something, sing me something. And Kedemon said, no, I cannot sing. He answered. And he said that, and that is why I've come here from the feast. Otherwise, I would have been sitting there in the feast. I cannot sing. That is why I got up from there. But whoever spoke to him in the dream said again, Kedemon, sing to me. And he said, what shall I sing? So from saying that, no, I cannot sing, he said, okay, tell me, what shall I sing? And the voice that spoke to him said, sing the beginning of created things. Sing the beginning of created things. Thereupon, Kedemon began to sing verses that he had never even heard before. He started singing. ऐसे वर्सेस जो उसने कभी सुने भी नहीं थे, अपनी लाइफ में नहीं सुने थे. कभी कभी होता है ना, sometimes it has happened with me at least. In my dream, I've sung some songs which I've never even heard about. I've spoken some languages also which I've never learned in my life. So he started singing. Now should we praise the power and wisdom of the Creator, the works of the Father? And he went on. And basically the hymns that he sang while he was sleeping. When he woke up the next morning, he actually remembered all of this. He remembered the words of the hymns and he added many more to it. So he went to the monastery in the morning and he showed them the gift that he has got. Now they also wanted to test him, of course, कि कहीं कोई fraud तो नहीं है, कोई ऐसी तो नहीं आ गया कोई. So he was brought to Hilda. I said there was a monastery of Abbess Hilda. Kedemon was brought to Hilda. And he was made to repeat all of those hymns that he had composed. To test him, they gave him this bit of a scripture from Latin. And he said, okay, you take this and come back with a poetry made out of it. He returned and he came back with a brilliant piece of poetry. A person who couldn't read, who couldn't write. This is the story of Kedemon. This is a gift from God that he got. Now, the greatest work that has been attributed to Kedemon is paraphrase. Okay? I won't go into detail of paraphrase. This is about Kedemon. Next, we move on to Kynewulf. Some people call him Kynewulf, some say Cynewulf also. Now, his name, it was not known until as late as 1840. But he was the only poet who signed his work. Now, if he was the one who signed his work, then why was his name not known until 1840? The name was not really signed like, end mein sign kar diya. It was woven into the verses. And that's how it was extracted from it. 8th century, he lived in the 8th century. And he is known as the greatest of Anglo-Saxon poets. Of course, if we had known the author of Beowulf, then the author of Beowulf would have been the greatest poet, but we don't know the name. So if we did not have Beowulf, it would have been Wolf that would have taken the place. There are some works that he has signed. Signed works are The Christ, Juliana, The Fates of Apostles, and Elena. There are some unsigned works which are attributed to Wolf by the kind of writing. The first is Andreas, The Phoenix, Dream of the Rood, The Descent into Hell, Guthlac, The Wanderer, and there are some riddles also which have been attributed to Wolf. Out of these works, The Christ is a very, very famous one. Also, The Dream of the Rood, and we've had questions also from The Dream of the Rood, The Christ. What does Rood symbolize in The Dream of Rood? Like that. So The Christ is one of the most characteristic of all of the works. It's a very didactic work. It has been written in 3 parts. The first part of The Christ talks about celebrating nativity. The second part is the ascension. The third part is doomsday. So from the beginning to the end, nativity se leke doomsday tak. Throughout the poem, you will see that there is a deep love for Christ that has been shown. So that Christian elements you will find in all of these works. Dream of Rood also. Rood symbolizes that cross. Next we have Alfred the Great, 848 say 901. We have already talked about Alfred in history, right? How he led the war against the Scandinavian, and he made his name in the political sphere. But then he left everything and he set himself to read and write Latin. He said, I would love to educate the people here. So he set himself to read and write. He took the task of educating people. At that point of time, all the education was in Latin. So he made some translations, and he is still known as a translator, much as a translator. First of all, he took the task of educating people and he gave them 10 commandments. Then what he did? He established some codes. Then after that, he set himself to teaching people, every freeborn Englishman, to read and write his own language and of translating into English the best books of for their instruction. Because local people को तो Latin उतना नहीं आता था. So he said himself कि मैं लोगों को सिखाऊंगा, I would teach them to read and write. So, and I will also translate the books for their instruction so that they can read in that language. Some of the works of Alfred we have. So he is known chiefly as a translator. We have 4 major translations. First one is Orosius's Universal History and Geography. Then he translated Bede's History. Then Pope Gregory's Shepherd's Book. And then Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. The first one, Orosius's Universal History and Geography, it was a leading work in general history for several centuries. It remained. Bede's History, we just saw, it is the first great historical work written on English soil. Pehla history ka work. Next, we have Pope Gregory's Shepherd's Book. Pope Gregory's Shepherd's Book is intended specially for clergy. Okay, जो लोग clergy, जो लोग church से relation में थे, the people who belonging to the church, they would read it. So it was basically meant for those people. And Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy it has been the favorite philosophical work of the Middle Ages. These are the translations, but the most important work is English Chronicle or the Saxon Chronicle. This also I talked about, and I told you that it did not end with the death of Alfred. It continued. It was continued after Alfred's death, and it remained the best monument of early English prose that is left to us. Also, this chronicle, it was a very dry kind of a record, especially about births and deaths of some of the people of West Saxon kingdom. Then Alfred ने इसको enlarge किया, beginning with the story of Caesar's conquest. Then he talked about his own time when he was the king. It talks about, and then it became an interesting and connected story. पहले एक dry सा record था births or deaths का. So oldest history belonging to any modern nation in its own language. And this was the close of Anglo-Saxon period. ठीक है? Next, we move on to the literature of Anglo-Norman period. First of all, we have Joffrey of Monmouth, the name. I'm sure you have all heard. 1154. The work is Historia Regum Britannia. Very famous work. It is noteworthy, not as a piece of literature that we're going to go into, but people have used it as a source book from later on for their literary materials. It's a very curious medley of pagan and Christian legends, of chronicle, comment, pure invention. Now, one very funny thing is, some people have called him a joker also. Why? He names it a Historia Regum Britannia, but it is full of imagination. There is no truth to the history that he wrote. Therefore, yes, if we look at it as a piece of imagination only, then it is very nice. But it's pure invention. It was all recorded in minute detail and with gravity, which makes it clear that Joffrey had no conscience, or else he was a great joker. या तो आपने बोल दिया कि हाँ नहीं हिस्ट्री है, पूरी हिस्ट्री लिखी है इन्होंने, but it was all full of pure imagination. But it was, surprisingly, it was very, very famous at the time it was written. People loved it. Those people who heard about it, उनको नहीं पता था that this is all imagination. I think that. Therefore, they really enjoyed it. The Normans, the Saxons, and they were so proud of their country. कि wow, ये हमारी country है. Whatever he wrote in it. But yes, it becomes very interesting because it gave a new direction to literature of England by showing the wealth of poetry, by showing the wealth of romance that was there in the tradition of Arthur and the Knights. Next, we have Laymon's Brut, 1200. This is also a history, but in the form of verse. Why were they writing in the form of verse, doggerel verse? Because probably this poetry is, more easily memorized than prose. So probably because of that. And it marks the first appearance of Arthurian legends in our tongue. English में नहीं थे इससे पहले, तो पहली बार Laymon's Brut में appearance है. Next we have Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This is the best piece of Anglo-Norman literature. Otherwise, there's nothing much worth reading in Anglo-Norman literature. But this piece especially is worth reading, and I would ask you to please read the summary of this work. Sir Gawain and Green Knight. Unknown author hai, but the author probably also wrote the best works, The Pearl, Cleanliness, all of these works, making him the greatest author of Norman period that we don't even know the name of. The Pearl was somewhere around 1350 written, and we know it in the order: the Pearl, cleanliness, patience. This has been a question in the exam, this order. So the Pearl, cleanliness, patience. Out of all of these, the Pearl is the most beautiful one. And how do we know the name of the Pearl? It was received from the translator of Pearl and editor. That was Richard Morris. In 1864, it was known, the name. It's a beautiful poem. Please read it. It is very, very heart-touching. It is very, very... It has a very realistic kind of a picture. And it's a father's grief, for his little daughter, Margaret. And he says, "My precious pearl without spot." It is the saddest of all the early poems that we have, the Pearl. Because there is a grave that is mentioned. I will just read out one or two lines. Listen to this. "On the grave of his little one, covered with flowers, the father pours out his love and grief till, in the summer stillness, he falls asleep, while we hear in the sunshine the drowsy hum of insects and the faraway sound of the reaper's sickles. He dreams there, and the dream grows into a vision beautiful. His body lies still upon the grave, while his spirit goes to the land exquisite beyond all words, where he comes suddenly upon a stream that he cannot cross. As he wanders along the bank, seeking in vain for a ford, a marvel rises before his eyes, a crystal cliff, and seated beneath it a little maiden who raises a happy, shining face, the face of his little Margaret." तो क्या होता है actually? In these early times, there was a trend of these dream works. चौसर में भी आएगा ना, सो गए और फिर ड्रीम आया, ड्रीम में पोम है. Similarly here also. So on the grave of his daughter, he falls asleep, the father, and he falls into a beautiful dream wherein there is a shore and he cannot cross it, but he sees that there is this marble that rises, and beneath it is a face that is there, a happy face, which is of his daughter Margaret. You can read it, it's a beautiful poem. Then we have some miscellaneous literature of Norman period. We have Ancren Rule, that is Rule of the Anchoress. It's the most beautiful bit of prose in Old English. It's actually a religious advice and comfort. It has been written for 3 ladies. And these ladies wished to live a religious life, but they did not want to become nuns. They did not want to enter any religious sect for that matter. So for them, this work is written. Next we have Cursor Mundi, 1320 around. It's a very, very long poem, and it's a kind of a metrical romance. It shows whole dealing of God with man, creation se leke doomsday tak. Cursor Mundi, very, very important work. We've had the name of Cursor Mundi so many times in literature in the future also. Then we have the Owl and the Nightingale. This is the first debate works. Debate है इसमें 2 birds के बीच में. एक bird जो है, it shows the gay side of life, happier, merrier. The other bird shows the sterner side of laws and morals. There's a debate. So these are some of the miscellaneous works of literature of Norman period. So that is it. With this we end the Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Norman period. In the literature of the Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Norman period, I want you to go through certain summaries of some works like Beowulf, we've already done. I want you to do Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, The Pearl, Owl and the Nightingale, especially these works. All right. Okay, I will meet you in the next session. If you have still not subscribed to the channel, please do it. I really need it. I really need your support to continue this channel. Share it with other people. Ask them also to subscribe to it, please. Thank you. I will see you in the next session. Take care. Bye bye.